Hello, my name is Kim and this is How We Met. It's a candid conversation between married couples discussing everything between the most cherished moments and the most challenging. So do me a favor, grab your favorite snack, share it with a friend, and enjoy as we go through how they met.
How we met adversity was Carmella has an older son who at first we vibed or whatever like that.
I was a teen parent.
She was a teen parent. So later on in our marriage, later on in the dating process, the courting, the proposal, all that stuff, it just started going south. And then after a while, it got so bad that at some point, like, the whole family was involved and phone calls. I mean, there was just a lot of stuff going on. So we had to meet it. Like, part of me wanted to stand up and be this big macho, I'm gonna defend my family, Mufasa character. But it didn't come to that. I had to let the sages of the family do what they did, and I had to keep the kids comforted and protected and things like that, because there was so much stuff that had gone on. I'm trying to dance around it for the sake of confidentiality, but I just think it took me having to come to her and say, listen, I understand. I'm not trying to enforce myself in. I'm here if you need me, but ultimately my responsibility was to comfort her and to be a support system. And I think I did that because it helped to win some of the other members of the family, like, oh, you definitely were more controlled than I thought you would be. And that's great, because it could have went real south real fast.
So, and how, I'll say it too, because we are 10 years apart. I had my son when I was 16. Therefore, him and my son are about 6 years apart. Right?
I think so.
And so you already know what that looks like. My son was like, this, whatever. He wasn't beat. He just was not for it. So that was a huge. It was huge. It was huge.
It went on for probably it still goes on, but in that space, it was probably like 10 months.
Yeah.
Of like every week was something happening. I think it moved us forward, but I think ultimately it stagnated some of our progress, because where we should have been focused on us, focusing on the kids and the family, we were too busy focusing outside. And so everything went to that. Like, we were talking to kids, not about stuff in their life. We were talking about stuff in this situation. We were talking to each other about how other people felt on the phone. It was too much. It took for us to have to really put a stake in the ground and say, we're not dealing with this anymore. And once we got to that point and we realized that, listen, we're not gonna be pulled out of character, we're not about to be pulled into a fight that is really not ours, we were able to get back to us. And even though that made some people mad, I think ultimately it saved our family.
How we met in adversity. So we both at some point were social workers, and I worked for foster care, and then eventually he worked for foster care. And our schedules were all over the place, and I was constantly driving. And at one point I got into 4 car accidents within the span of 5 months, and I was always the one being hit. And that spun me into a very long period of physical therapy with some questions, painful tests, constantly in pain, constantly sitting with electrodes on my back if I'm going to church or anything like that. Not really being able to fix the pain, just coping with it through medicine and then going through withdrawal from the medicine. So it was a long period of time where I would say that you felt helpless, seeing me in pain and not being able to do anything about it. And so I don't think that really caused too many conflicts, but it was when I had to trust him to take care of me in my most fragile state, because I couldn't do anything about the pain, and I was frustrated, and I was concerned, and he was concerned, and sometimes we would butt heads, mostly because I would still want to, I think I said this to him before, I would still want to be myself and still want to do things, and he would want to protect me from those things, but that would make me feel less than a person. I did not want to feel like a patient with him. And I think because he's so protective, he kind of treated me like a patient until we had the conversation.
Yeah, I was gonna make a point. I think I had to learn a lot even after you started to get better, because between the two of us, she had been the one who had dealt with like little health stuff, for me, the worst that I've had, you know, a cold here and there. You know, her stuff was like hospital visits and like you sick for a few days, weeks. So my protective muscles, I guess, they were on overdrive at a point. And I think during those moments, that's when I began to be overprotective and almost forget, like, this is a human being. Like, she's hurting, but she's not an invalid, you know, she's not handicapped. So there was a big learning curve that I had to go through of here's this strong person who just happens to be, you know, not 100%. And she's trying to find balance, and I have to find balance in what's appropriate in terms of care and support. And, you know, I had gone overboard quite a few times before really learning that balance.
Well, we met at adversity when he got in a little bit of trouble, and we got through it.
A lot of trouble.
we got through it. I think that's why you really owe me.
Yeah,
Yeah, you owe me.
I got in a lot of trouble. So that's where the Christian part came in, you know, being a believer to get me out of that trouble. Mm-hmm. And her being strong made me strong with the situation. And she handled it well, because she could have pretty much been gone, but she handled it because she loves me.
Of course, because I love you, but I think also that was the maturity level in me,
right,
and not being young.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and hitting the streets and things like that,
right,
and saying I'm done.
Right.
But I saw all the good in you. We've had good times, and we had, you know, a lot to grow together.
Right.
And if our relationship prior to that was on a downhill, then I could have walked.
Right.
But because it was constantly going uphill, and all I saw was it getting better and better and stronger and stronger, right, it allowed me to stick around and go through that with you.
And then coming up with a good family behind you, her family really took me in. They really took me in. So,
oh yeah,
kudos to your family.
Absolutely, absolutely. They wouldn't have had it any other way.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just me that was
like
holding
right now,
you
they
down.
leave her for me. True story.
No, it ain't true story.
All right, well, close to it.
Close to it.
Get them on the couch. Let's ask her.
I think the moment of adversity kind of kept us close together.
I think it brought us close together. It made us realize early that we can do it. Basically, that's what it was. So like now, I think we can get through anything after that. That wasn't even a thought then, but after we went through it, we can get through anything now.
Absolutely.
You know, I could drop her ice cream all day now. We'd get through it. It wouldn't be nothing. Now, let me hold that. It wouldn't even matter.
Really? Okay.
No, how do we meet adversity? Because I'm a black man living in America, and there are certain stigmas and certain things that we come across that not every other type of person comes across, and it's not something that you were familiar with.
Right. I think the way we met in adversity was like this together, right? We did it together, and we learned along the way. So we didn't expect one another to know. We just kind of loved each other right where we were at, and it didn't matter. And you're right, I grew up very different. I grew up very much treating people and learning people by their character, not by their color. And so for me, this is not abnormal at all. Like, to me, this is natural. I wouldn't think anything of it. I didn't have any challenges with having my children not look like me. Like, to me, that was normal. That just is part of life. And I think for me, the adversity coming in, we just handled it together.
Like, for example, for one Christmas, you bought me a camera for my car. so that in case something would happen, like I was to get pulled over, I would have evidence and proof of either my innocence or proof of what's happening, what's partaking. And that's not something you would also thought about ever buying anybody.
Right. That's very true. But I think too, we faced adversity in other ways too. I think we faced it with our kids. We faced it in our family. We faced it in so many ways, and not because of them being African American. We faced it because they're being raised in two homes and they are byproducts of a divorce, and that hurts, and they lost their grandma, and a lot of different things transpired along that time. And so that adversity, the way we did it, was just really being together, making sure we maintained us so that we could be then good for everybody around us. In that.
And another situation that was hard for us, if you want to talk about it, is the infertility issue.
Yeah, so that was really a tough situation for us. So, you know, it's one thing when you go through infertility and neither of you have children. It's another when you know that your partner has children. It's something that you long to give to them and you can't. And so we went through the infertility, and I think, you know, there's so many things now that I hope at some point I can just help educate people, because if I had known, there may have been something that could have helped us along the way that we didn't know. But at the time, it was a very lonely process. Nobody would talk to us about it. Nobody would have conversations and just sit with us in it. We didn't even know how to sit in it. We didn't know how to process it. And we knew that there were going to be challenges, and we knew what we needed to do. And that was a whole process for me too, because I felt like when we went through the medical process, boom, it would happen. And then I felt like I was playing God. So then this religious kind of connotation, and people, I'm just gonna say, religious people in my ear, some were for it, some were against it. I had too many opinions circling around me, and I couldn't even hear God. I didn't know. And I would say to God, like, am I playing you? Because once I do this, I'm gonna get pregnant, and then is it the right time? Is it? And I've learned over the course of time, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so, you know, that was very important to me. Like, can we do this right now? I felt like my whole life was a bit in shambles, not in a bad way. I just was trying to, 2 months, right? We got married in 2 months. And so I'm trying to figure it out. And I remember, so we got married, I was already in my 30s, my mid-30s. And I remember going to the doctor and him saying to me, like, do you want to start getting pregnant? And I'm like, no, like, we just got married. Can we just, like, give it a little time? I want to know my husband. And then when we did go down the road and we sat with the doctors, our situation was a little different. We went in and we began to do the treatments. We started to do it. The insurance company would only pay for one process, so it had to work. If it didn't work, we weren't going to get another chance unless we came out of pocket, like, I don't know, $20,000 or something crazy like that. And we didn't have that kind of money. And so we sat and we said, okay, we'll go through this process. And as it started getting closer to the time that they would then take the eggs, they said to me, for some reason, your follicles, we saw, I was going, I think, like once a week. And they said, well, last week we saw 6, and now we can't find but 2. And it was like they were disappearing. And I remember the day the doctor came in, and he said, I don't know what's happening. We can't find them. We can't find they're supposed to be maturing. They were increasing the hormones that I was taking every day, which actually made me feel great. I felt really, really good. I thought I was gonna go crazy, and I didn't. And so that taught me something later, right down the road, that I felt really good on the hormones. But he said, it's not working. And so he says, you're not taking them anymore. Just stop. And he walked out the door. And I said, well, what does this mean? And the nurse says, well, you know, you can come back and we'll have another consult, but we're not doing anything else today. And I walked out of the door with my dreams crushed. And talk about like bad bedside skills, right? I mean, I was all by myself. My husband was at work. And I remember getting in the car and just thinking like, what just happened? Like, how can this be happening to me? And I had a meeting at church, and I went directly to church because God has always been my safe place. And so I went to church. And that was not a safe place. It did not turn out to be what I expected it to be. And at that moment, I couldn't even figure out what was happening. I just couldn't wrap my head around it, and I began to spiral. And I went into a very dark place. And now, after being in that process, I realized that the hormones, coming off of those hormones, because they had pumped me so high with them, of course I'm gonna like drop, right? I mean, but nobody would help me. And it was so lonely, and I couldn't, my family was very much against it. So the people that I would entrust that with, I couldn't talk to. They didn't even know it was happening. And it was so lonely. And I felt like my husband couldn't understand. And why? Because he had kids. I just felt like he really could not understand it, and I was all by myself. And it really took me on a journey where God, not only in a natural journey of that, but where God really showed me people without him. Because at that moment, I felt like I was without him, because he had let me down. He was the only thing that was constant in my life, and he wasn't there, and he wasn't listening. And so it was a hard battle, and for a long time I was fighting by myself. And had it not been, I wasn't fighting by myself because I had my husband, but had my husband not been the man of God that he is and pray for me, I don't think I would be sitting here today, because it was so beyond what I ever could comprehend. And so, you know, and there's still days that I'm not okay. And I have to be okay with the fact I'm not okay. And sometimes, you know, people invite me to baby showers and things, and I want to shower love on them, but it reminds me of a void that's in my life. And I celebrate them. It's not that at all. It's just I'm not fixed yet. Like it's a process. I'm still working it out. And there's a lot of things. We did try again later, years later. But it took me years to get to the point where I would even have the conversation again. And so by the time we then went to have the consultation, it was years later, and I was in my 40s, and the doctor said, you know, it's good that you came now, because the older you get, you know, the worse the harder it's gonna be, but we can do it. And I met the most amazing doctor, and he gave me hope. And for the first time, I had hope. And as we started the process, life happens, and a lot of things were going on, and I knew in order for it to work, I needed to be less stressed. And I was on the road, I don't know, 98% of the time. I was in London every other week, and it was just, things were too stressful at that moment, and I had to make a decision, and it just wasn't the right time. And the more we tried, it felt like the less it was happening. And I just got to a point where I said, God, I'm done. I'm done trying. It's up to you. If you want it to happen, it'll happen. If you don't, then just make me okay and be okay with that. And some days I'm okay, and Some days I'm not, especially when people bring their babies. I'm like, whoo, Lord, I'm good. Thank you, Jesus. But there's still that part that hurts. And I think that while it was a journey we did together, I did feel very isolated in that time. And I would share that with my husband, and he wouldn't understand that. But there was a very, very, it's hard. It's really hard. And I don't want anyone to ever go through it alone. And nobody knew how to talk to us about it. Nobody would ask the question. People that did know, I had one girlfriend, she's a therapist, that's why, right? She wasn't a therapist at the time, she is now, but she was the only person that would ask me questions, to the point that, because I didn't want to deal with it, and she would ask me those questions. And so, you know, it's hard. That was really hard on our marriage, but we made it.
Yeah, and it's okay. You know, it's, I guess in life, that's a lesson, that sometimes it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah, very much.
You know?
And I think what God wants to do out of it is really, there's more coming from that. And I know that, but it was very dark for a long time, very dark. One other thing that I learned through the process is that my husband's very patient, because he would just stop talking, right? And he wouldn't do anything. But it's that emotional roller coaster it's bad. And you don't want to go through it alone. So find somebody, right? Find somebody, because sometimes it's not your spouse that can go through it with you because they don't understand. But I did later find out I had to go, because my hormones were like that. I felt so good on the hormones. I had to later go see a doctor about hormone replacement, and found out, because you also assume a lot of responsibility that may not be yours to assume, right? So I assumed that God just thought I was a bad mom. I wouldn't be a good mom. And then that's a whole other story when we're talking about launching a church, right? Like, you can't trust me with a baby, but you're going to trust me with a whole bunch of souls. Like, that just doesn't seem right, God. Like, there's something wrong here. But I realized it was my body. And so later, years, I mean, we're talking years and years later, I find out that my ovaries just stopped working. And it could have been the hormones, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But I realized at that point, it wasn't because I was a bad person, or I was a bad mom, or I wasn't gonna be good enough. All of those things made me realize, like, it just was my body, and I can't do anything about that.
So how we met grief, my dad died right before, like 7 months before we got married. And so for me, I don't think I've ever had like a serious grieving process with that, because of the relationship that I had with my dad. My dad and I were very, very close, you know, and so when he was about to die, I had already known this, and I felt comfort about everything. The night that he died, I walked up to his room, kissed him on the forehead, said, "I'll see you soon." I walked out, and that was kind of the end of it for me. But really, it's just the memory. So every now and again, it'll be like, hey, you know, I was thinking about my dad, or I listened to this song thinking about my dad. But we meet grief by giving each other the space to grieve.
Yeah, because we both had that counseling background. So
Yeah.
my dad passed away too, but years before I met him. And so I still had that grieving process too, where I'm like, why didn't he leave me this? Or why do I have to struggle because he didn't perform what he needed to perform in my life? So I think because of that background, we're very supportive in that process.
And even the grief of divorce. The grief of divorce,
yeah,
like, it's a constant process, because we have products of the previous marriage around us all the time. So I think we handle it with some levels of grace of, like, this might have nothing to do with me, but I'm a support, but if I have to step in, then I do that.
Right.
And I try to make sure that she has the space to take care of it.
And when his father died, it was the same way.
How we met grief was through the journey of expanding our family. So when we started out, after being married, I became pregnant, and then I had a miscarriage. After the miscarriage, I was told that I would probably never be able to have kids, and if I did have kids, it would be a struggle. After we had the first miscarriage, I got pregnant 2 years later with our baby girl, Diana, who was born with a genetic condition, and we were told at 16 weeks of pregnancy that she was going to die. And so fast forward, she's here, we have her. We went through a lot, constant questions every time we went to the doctors of how we were going to plan her funeral, you know, how we were feeling. Did we talk to her funeral home? Do we know if we're going to cremate her or bury her? Like, it was every few weeks, and the closer you get to delivery, it becomes every week. And so we were so ecstatic that she had beat all the odds and that she was going to be here as long as God wanted her here. And then she came, she got here, she was with us for 5 days, and then she passed. And prior to her passing, I lost probably about 8 or 9 family members between the two of us. And my brother died suddenly 3 months before. And so after her, we had our now baby girl, and then after her, this past October, we just lost another one. So our grief story, I feel like, is a bulk of our marriage story. It has been a very hard journey, a lot of tears, a lot of different emotions, especially with hormones and postpartum, and it was very difficult to the point where I felt so much like a failure because my body had failed me. I felt so much like a failure that I just didn't want to be married because I felt like he deserved better. And so I told him that. I told him that, you know, we could get a divorce, you can go about your business, you can be with whomever you choose to because you wanted kids. This is all, you've always been the kid person between the two of us, and it just seems like it's not something that me or my body can give you, unfortunately. And he wasn't having it. I'm glad for that.
That was that part that was, you helped strengthen that. No, we're not doing that.
He wasn't having it, and he said it that way too. He wasn't having that, but it was very painful, but the greatest thing that we got out of it is that we were so much involved in other people's lives through our own story that we just didn't know. And so people started opening up to us, men especially, about losses with kids and miscarriage and stillbirths that they never talked about. But I think it was the most painful part of our journey, but the most rewarding, although that sounds odd, the most rewarding part of our journey.
Mm-hmm.
So we met grief very recently. Both of us lost our first nephews.
Yeah, our oldest nephews.
So on my side and as well as on his side.
Both our sisters lost their sons.
And that really, you know, it brought us closer together in the sense that
tomorrow ain't promised, basically.
Right, absolutely.
It could happen at any time. It was a bad situation, so it brought us closer together for that also, once again.
Yeah.
To let us know that we could get through that also. And, you know, we had a lot of deaths, basically, on my side, my dad and other people, my stepmother. It was like back to back to back to back. It was like, whoa. So it was good that we was there for each other.
And so I'm sort of the one that even my family calls first when there's a death. And even his family calls me because they say that I know how to make them feel better, or I know how to get them to start laughing. Right. So if, you know, they're crying or something, I'm like, you know, stop all that crying, man up, man. Or I say something funny and they'll start laughing, you know, not to make light of the situation, but, you know, you don't want to stay in a down spiral. You don't want to, you know, have that feeling of depression or anything. So when he lost his nephew first, and he was going through it, but it was my nephew as well, but on his side, we kind of went through it together, you know, praying about it.
Talking about
talking about it, and
as a family,
reaching out to the families and being there for them as we should as a couple.
Right.
Yeah, I think grief is hard for anybody to experience.
But being Christians, once again, help 100%. Being a believer.
Yeah, it absolutely does help because, we know that there's a better place for all of us.
Plus, being the situation what our nephews went through, passing away, the old me might have been, out there, to be honest,
right.
trying to find out, who did it and when, why, but
Yeah, my nephew was murdered, and his nephew died on, it was a motorcycle accident. And so both situations, even the one that died on a motorcycle accident, the guy, he was negligent, and he just crossed over and hit him. And so you have anger as well. I mean, we have grief, but the anger of the situation of how both of them happened.
So we're there for each other now. We still talk about it.
We have to calm each other down because,
we can go there. We go there.
You're Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah, Bonnie and Clyde all day.
All day.
Thank you for watching How We Met. This is a conversation that we're going to continue next week, so make sure that you join us and tune in as the couples discuss how they met.